Dutch van der Linde's decision to kill Micah Bell at the climax of Red Dead Redemption 2 is a moment of intense significance, rich with emotional weight and complexity. This act isn't just a matter of revenge, it represents the final breaking point for a man who once stood as a symbol of loyalty, freedom, and leadership. Over the course of the game, Dutch's character moods and ideals shift dramatically, of course influenced by betrayal, guilt, paranoia, and the game's own internal flaws. Ultimately, after completing the game, the question of why Dutch shot Micah stands out, as the question itself dives into themes of redemption, self-preservation, and the corrupting power of ambition, revealing the tragic fall of a leader who lost sight of his ideals. Today, we will be attempting to answer why exactly Dutch shot Micah. If you enjoy videos like this one, please be sure to subscribe, as 99% of viewers have not yet done so. Now let's dive into Dutch's decision to kill Micah at the end of RDR2. To answer the question of why Dutch shot Micah, we must first question the very nature of Dutch himself. Dutch's role as a father figure to Arthur and John is foundational to the emotional weight of the game's story. Dutch plucks both Arthur and John from troubled backgrounds, offering them a sense of family, belonging, and purpose. For Arthur, who was brought into the game at age 14, Dutch's influence is profound. Arthur grew to respect Dutch deeply, viewing him as a moral guide who teaches him to navigate a harsh world with principles. Dutch imparts values about loyalty and brotherhood, creating a bond that feels inseparable at first, like a new family for Arthur. For John, Dutch's impact is equally significant. John, an orphan who wandered alone before joining the gang, finds in Dutch a leader who gives him a new sense of identity and camaraderie. Early interactions reveal how Dutch cares for John and Arthur, mentoring them and building a shared vision for a better life. He provides guidance and models what it means to stand against injustice, positioning himself as a righteous outlaw and cultivating a powerful sense of loyalty within the gang. Dutch initially upholds a strict code of honor, positioning the gang as different from others by claiming they only rob those who deserve it. His insistence on moral superiority sets the gang apart and imbues Arthur and John with a sense of pride in their way of life. On the outside, the gang may merely be outlaws. However, inside, they all felt they were living for a bigger purpose. Dutch validates this feeling for Arthur and John throughout the game. He even treats new members like family, quickly integrating Sadie Adler after her loss and showing tenderness to the gang's women and children. His actions, at first, reinforce the image of Dutch as a leader who genuinely cares for his people. However, as the story progresses, a decline in Dutch's mental and emotional health becomes increasingly apparent, slowly impacting his decisions and undermining his once strong ideals. Throughout the story, Dutch also suffers a head injury during a robbery in Saint Denis that goes horribly wrong. After this injury, Dutch exhibits further erratic behavior, paranoia, impulsivity, and a growing lack of empathy. While this video is not to diagnose Dutch, these symptoms are often linked to traumatic brain injury. These changes signal the beginning of his departure from the principles he once professed, as he becomes less capable of rational thought and more susceptible to outside influences, especially those from Micah Bell. Micah Bell's introduction to the game marks a crucial turning point in Dutch's behavior. Although Micah just joined the game only 5 months before the events we see in-game, he is an antagonizer, feeding Dutch's sense of paranoia and pushing him towards ever more ruthless tactics. Throughout the game, Arthur and Hosea, Dutch's oldest friends and confidants, repeatedly voice their distrust of Micah, but Dutch dismisses their warnings. Micah's influence intensifies Dutch's violent impulses, leading to increasingly reckless decisions that ultimately tear the gang apart. Micah quickly capitalizes on Dutch's fragile state, positioning himself as a loyal ally, while subtly manipulating Dutch's increasing paranoia to alienate him from other gang members. As Dutch's mental health deteriorates, his decisions grow more reckless and illogical. He demands unwavering loyalty from the gang, viewing any dissent as betrayal. This demand for blind allegiance is a stark contrast to his earlier leadership style, which valued mutual respect and personal freedom. At Beaver Hollow, Dutch becomes more volatile and mistrustful, even of those closest to him, such as Arthur Morgan, whom he accuses of disloyalty despite Arthur's steadfast support. This slow descent is further exacerbated by the constant stress of evading the law and the pressures of leadership, which intensified Dutch's paranoia and violent tendencies. He frequently justifies his violent actions with idealistic rhetoric, but his motivations are increasingly self-serving. The Dutch who once spoke of freedom and loyalty now seems driven by a need for control and power, showing little regard for the well-being of his followers. By the time the gang settles in Beaver Hollow, Dutch is willing to sacrifice his closest allies and compromise his own moral code, becoming fully entangled in Micah's influence, which accelerates his decline. The trauma Dutch endures throughout the game, combined with the immense stress of constantly evading the law, serves to magnify his worst traits and push him further into Micah's orbit. Furthermore, by Beaver Hollow, Arthur voices suspicions that Dutch may not have changed at all, but rather that his true colors are coming to light.
Those goddamn bastards.
Look, just follow me, okay? We're gonna get this done, Arthur.
Now he don't care if he orphans his friend's child so long as he gets rich? All his goddamn talk all them years. Seems like it was always a lie. Or he went crazy. What a mess.
Sure. Guess he began to believe he was God or something.
I don't know.
Dutch's treatment of his followers reveals a deep betrayal of the ideals he once claimed to hold dear. While he speaks of loyalty, brotherhood, and freedom, his actions increasingly contradict these values. A pivotal moment occurs when Miss Grimshaw, a long-standing member and a mother figure to the gang, is killed by Micah for challenging him. Dutch does nothing to defend her, an act that underscores the extent to which he has sacrificed the gang's integrity to protect Micah. Perhaps the most profound betrayal is Dutch's abandonment of Arthur. In honorable ending, Arthur urges Dutch to recognize Micah's treachery, but Dutch refuses to listen. He walks away, allowing Micah to live even as he witnesses the devastation Micah has caused. This decision represents a fundamental break with the gang's founding principles, as Dutch chooses to protect a man he knows to be a traitor over a man who has given everything for the gang. By the time Dutch confronts Micah years later, it is clear that he has lost the loyalty and respect of those he once led, as the people he considered family no longer recognize the man they followed. While one could blame Micah for most of Dutch's actions, the question still remains: did Micah simply bring out traits in Dutch that were already there, or did he actively corrupt him? There is substantial evidence to suggest that Dutch was vulnerable to Micah's manipulations due to his desire for validation and his aversion to being questioned. Micah knew how to play to Dutch's ego, painting him as a visionary, a leader destined to guide the gang to freedom. Yet, as Hosea, Arthur, and even John begin to see through Micah, it becomes clear that Dutch's loyalty to Micah comes at the expense of the gang's integrity. In the epilogue, John implies the same thing to Sadie Adler, suggesting that Dutch may have been this way all along.
You heard anything of Dutch?
Nothing. You?
No. You'd think. He's a colorful character. Word would get out.
That's one way of putting it. Look, what happened with the gang changed everyone who was a part of it. The Dutch who put a blanket round me after the O'Driscolls, that weren't the same man at Beaver Hollow. And now, he might not be so colorful no more.
You see a man whose character changed. I see a man who got found out for who he truly was. We was fools to follow him. I was a fool and I paid for it. And I was one of the lucky ones.
Micah, John. Micah's the one who set it off.
He admits that while Dutch once offered him warmth and shelter, he now sees that the Dutch of Beaver Hollow is not the same man, and he is right. For example, Dutch's relationship with Hosea, who was instrumental in keeping his more volatile tendencies in check, provides insight into the character he once was and the man he became. Hosea's death marks a critical turning point for Dutch, as he loses the only person who could challenge him without fear of retribution. With Hosea gone, Dutch spirals into a pattern of destructive behavior, using the gang's loyalty as a shield for his actions. Unable to feel empathy, as he doubles down on his erratic actions, this shift is emblematic of Dutch's internal struggle, whether he is a benevolent leader guiding his gang through a world that increasingly rejects them, or a manipulative figure who uses loyalty as a tool for control. In the final confrontation of the game, Dutch emerges as John confronts Micah atop a snowy mountain. As tensions peak, Dutch says little, conveying a deep sense of inner conflict. He watches the standoff unfold, seemingly undecided, until suddenly, Dutch shoots Micah, finally rejecting his former ally. After this single act, Dutch walks away, leaving behind the man he used to be and his fractured legacy, while John and Sadie look on in disbelief. Now that we know the history of Dutch's nature, we can discuss why he decided to kill Micah, and better yet, if the act of killing Micah serves as redemption for Dutch, or merely served as an act of desperation. With that being said, I present to you a few theories. Our first theory suggests Dutch's intentional choice to kill Micah Bell can be interpreted as a culmination of guilt, realization, and resentment. The realization that Micah was the true rat who caused the gang's downfall leads Dutch to a moment of reckoning. Throughout the game, Micah's influence grows as he drives a wedge between Dutch and his closest allies, convincing Dutch to prioritize power over loyalty. When Dutch confronts Micah at the mountaintop, it's as if he finally understands the damage Micah inflicted on the gang, the only family Dutch ever truly valued. Dutch's choice to side with Micah over Arthur, John, and others becomes his undoing. By the time he faces Micah, Dutch has lost not only his gang, but also the principles he once claimed to uphold. The gang members he regarded as family, including Hosea, Arthur, and Miss Grimshaw, have died or been betrayed, and Dutch's role in their loss is glaring. This guilt, compounded by the discovery that Micah was the one who led them all astray, drives Dutch to pull the trigger. When he tells John he is there for the same reason, it implies that he finally accepts Micah's betrayal and understands that justice is overdue.
What are you doing here, Dutch? Same as you, I suppose.
Dutch's decision to leave the Blackwater money behind further emphasizes his disillusionment. Throughout the game, this fortune represents Dutch's drive to keep the gang together and escape to a new life. However, by the end, Dutch realizes that this pursuit has cost him everything he once cared about. Leaving the money could signify Dutch's acknowledgement that his greed, inflamed by Micah, contributed to the gang's downfall. This act reflects his desire to distance himself from the path that led to so much destruction. Despite this moment of clarity, Dutch's act does not achieve redemption. He doesn't apologize to John, nor does he express remorse for the lives lost because of his decisions. By walking away without a word, Dutch's shooting of Micah comes across as a decision made for himself, rather than out of respect for those he betrayed. He does not avenge his fallen comrades nor attempt to atone for his sins. Instead, he severs his connection to the man who led him to ruin. This incomplete gesture highlights Dutch's complex nature, as he fails to offer any form of closure or resolution for the pain he caused. Dutch's act is simply one of desperation, an attempt to sever ties with the past and escape the ruin he has wrought. The killing of Micah serves as Dutch's last significant act, a violent repudiation of the man who helped bring him to his lowest point. Another theory is that Dutch initially returns to Micah to start over. In this view, Dutch and Micah joined forces in an attempt to rebuild the gang, driven by a need to recapture the glory and power that Dutch lost. They share a volatile partnership in their new criminal activities, while using the Blackwater money to fund their lives. However, the day that Dutch returned to Micah just so happened to be the day John showed up. Another important detail to bring up is that if Dutch and Micah were enemies, Dutch would have had to fight Micah's men on the mountain as well, but that does not seem to be what happened. When John confronts Dutch and Micah in the final standoff, Micah can be heard saying, "Join us, John, join us," and tells John him and Dutch are teaming up again.
Dutch and I are teaming up once more. We got money, we got dreams. Join us, John. Join us.
When Dutch says him and John are there for the same reason, we can assume Dutch is referring to the money. However, the mention of Arthur acts as a powerful trigger for Dutch. Suggesting Arthur's memory brings Dutch back to a time when his actions were driven by a moral code, and he is reminded of the loyalty and values he once held dear. Arthur had warned Dutch about Micah, and now, with John reinforcing those memories, Dutch realizes the depth of his mistakes. The reminder of Arthur's loyalty and sacrifice contrasts sharply with Micah's self-serving nature, and Dutch may see in John a reflection of what he has lost by aligning with Micah.
Let her go.
Now I can't do that, John.
Dutch. Dutch, come on now.
You shot at me, son.
You started. You betrayed me. I could say the same as you.
I was trying to do my best. You just cared for yourself.
I think differently.
Join us. Join us, John.
Let her go! She ain't well.
I don't want to kill you, John.
Arthur saved my life. More than once.
Arthur's been dead a long time.
At this moment, Dutch stops talking, until finally resentment toward Micah culminates in a violent rejection.
Dutch. Dutch. We all did our best for you. Ain't our fault. Things turned out the way they did. Dutch, killing me won't solve nothing.
Put down your gun, Marston!
Say something, Dutch. Say something.
I ain't got too much to say no more.
Micah's mention of Arthur forces Dutch to confront the betrayal he allowed, and it may become clear to him that his partnership with Micah has only deepened his moral ruin. Unable to reconcile the influence of Arthur's memory with the man Micah has become, Dutch pulls the trigger, severing the partnership to distance himself from the betrayal and manipulation that Micah represents. This act is not one of redemption, but a reaction to the painful reminder of what he lost by turning away from his true problems. Ultimately, Dutch's decision to kill Micah combines elements of all these theories. Whether driven by guilt, a desire for redemption, self-preservation, or a deteriorating mind, Dutch's final act encapsulates the tragic downfall of a leader who once symbolized loyalty and freedom. The ambiguity surrounding Dutch's motives leaves players questioning his true character, making this moment one of the most compelling and debated in the entire game.